Tennessee Governor Bill Haslam suggests the top priority for the University of Tennessee should start with a new system president and then move to a chancellor for the Knoxville campus. President Joe DiPietro is set to retire at the end of the year. The governor today reiterated his support for the president and his decision to fire the chancellor. And the governor suggests the next president should be the person to hire the next chancellor.
10 News reporter Mark Salinger explains the direction the governor hopes the university takes.
My own thought is you probably start the president's search first and determine who that's going to be, and then let him or her, whoever the new president is, be a part of the chancellor's decision.
It's been a rocky couple of months on Rocky Top. Governor Bill Haslam admits the University of Tennessee is in a challenging position as the leadership changes. As governor, Haslam serves as the chair of the Board of Trustees.
We're in a challenging position because Dr. DiPietro is going to retire, within the next 12 months as well. So we have a brand new board of directors as well.
Haslam says UT System President Joe DiPietro kept him informed on his decision to fire Chancellor Beverly Davenport this week, but wanted to make it clear it was not his decision to make.
That was the president's decision. He did keep me informed through the process, and I support him in his decision.
Supporters of Haslam have encouraged the governor to seek the office of the president of the university once DiPietro retires. Haslam has always said he did not think it was in his future. Today he stated unequivocally he will not be the next president.
I want to be really clear. The University of Tennessee will have a great next president, but it won't be me. That's not really what I want to do next, and it's not what the university needs.
A message painted on the rock on the UT campus after Davenport's firing this week said, "Go away, Haslams. We heart Bev." The governor says the criticism is to be expected.
We get criticized. Some people saying you're not involved enough. Other people say you're too involved. I think you play the role that you're supposed to play.
Mark Salinger, WBIR 10 News.
And Governor Haslam says he does not yet know the timeline for the search for a new president or chancellor. He does support the decision to appoint Wayne Davis as interim chancellor. DiPietro will formally introduce Davis on Monday.